Let me tell you something that took me years to understand, and I want you to grasp it right here, right now, so you don't spend the next decade of your life chasing the wrong thing. Because most people spend their entire lives chasing positions. They want the title. They want the office with the window. They want the nameplate on the door. They want somebody to call them director, vice president, manager, executive. And there is nothing wrong with wanting those things. Nothing at all. But here is the great error of our time. People are trying to acquire the position without first becoming the person. And that is like trying to harvest a crop you never planted. It simply does not work that way. It has never worked that way. And no matter how desperately you wish it would, it is never going to work that way. Now, I want you to think about this carefully. Think about the people you have known in your life who received a promotion they were not ready for. Maybe you have seen it at work. Maybe you have experienced it yourself. Someone gets elevated into a role they have not grown into, and within 6 months, 12 months, 2 years at most, they are either quietly moved out or visibly struggling. Not because the opportunity was bad, not because the organization failed them, but because the person had not yet become what the position required. The position exposed them, and that is the great revealer. Positions do not build people. People must build themselves, and then the position simply becomes the natural expression of who they have already become. There is an old principle I have carried with me for decades now, and it says this: success is not something you pursue. Success is something you attract by the person you become. Read that again carefully. Not pursue, attract. Because when you chase success, it is like trying to catch a butterfly. The harder you run, the faster it flies away. But when you work on yourself, when you develop your skills and sharpen your mind and discipline your habits and expand your philosophy, it is as if you become a garden. And when you become a garden, the butterflies come to you. Success comes to you. The right people come to you. The right opportunities find you. Not because you were lucky, not because you knew the right people, but because you had become the right person. Now let me tell you about a young man I met early in my career. Sharp dresser, quick talker, ambitious. He wanted everything now. He wanted the salary now. He wanted the corner office now. He wanted respect now. And I asked him a simple question. I said, "What are you reading?" He looked at me like I had asked him to climb a mountain. He said, "Reading? I do not have time to read. I have goals to achieve." And I thought to myself, that is exactly the problem. This young man wants the fruit without tending the tree. He wants the harvest without planting the seed. He wants the result without doing the work that precedes the result. And I have to tell you, that particular young man did not make it. Not because the world was unfair to him, but because he never invested in the one asset that matters above all others: himself. Because here is what I know after all these years of studying people, of observing what separates those who make it from those who do not. The answer is never the position. The answer is always the person. Always, without exception. Show me a person of exceptional character, exceptional discipline, exceptional curiosity, exceptional courage, and I will show you someone who will eventually occupy an exceptional position. It may not happen today, it may not happen next year, but it will happen, because you cannot keep a truly developed person down. They rise. Like cream to the top of the milk, they rise. Not because someone gave them a ladder, but because their internal elevation eventually demands external expression. Now I want to talk about what it actually means to work on yourself, because this is where most people go wrong. They hear the phrase personal development and they think it means attending a seminar on a Saturday, taking notes in a fancy notebook, feeling inspired for about 3 days, and then going right back to the same routine they had before. That is not personal development. That is personal entertainment. And I am not here to entertain you. I am here to challenge you. I am here to disturb your complacency. I am here to hand you a mirror and say, look at what you have been doing. Look at where you have been investing your time, your energy, your attention, your years. And then ask yourself honestly, are these the investments of someone who is becoming, or are these the habits of someone who is merely existing? Working on yourself means something specific. It means daily reading. Not occasional reading, not reading when you feel like it. Daily reading, because your mind is either growing or shrinking. There is no neutral position. Every day that you do not feed your mind, it loses a little bit of its edge. Every day that you do not introduce a new idea, you become a little more rigid, a little more narrow, a little more predictable, a little more ordinary. And ordinary people occupy ordinary positions, not because they were cursed, but because they settled for ordinary preparation. I used to read 2 to 3 hours every day, not because someone forced me, but because I understood something early on that changed everything for me. I understood that every book I read was a conversation with someone who had already made the journey I was trying to make. Every biography I studied was a blueprint left behind by someone who had already built what I wanted to build. Every philosophy I absorbed was a tool I could use to solve problems I had not yet encountered. And when the problems arrived, and they always arrive, I had something to reach for. I had resources. I had perspective. I had context. The person who does not read has nothing to reach for except their own limited experience. And your own limited experience is the smallest library in the world. Let me tell you something about the library. There are some libraries that have millions of books, millions. Histories and sciences and philosophies and stories and strategies from every corner of human civilization stretching back thousands of years. And all of that is available to you, every single bit of it, for almost nothing. And yet most people spend their evenings in front of a screen watching other people live their lives instead of investing even 30 minutes a day expanding their own. And then those same people wonder why they are not advancing. They wonder why they keep getting passed over. They wonder why someone else got the opportunity they deserved. And the answer, if they were honest with themselves, is that they did not deserve it yet. Because you do not deserve a position. You earn the right to occupy a position by becoming the person the position demands. Now let us talk about skills, because skills are the currency of advancement. Not intentions, not desires, not wishes. Skills. Every skill you develop is a deposit in the bank of your own value. And here is the beautiful thing about that bank. Nobody can rob it. A recession cannot take it. A bad economy cannot diminish it. The company that lays you off cannot repossess it. Your skills go with you everywhere. They are yours permanently. And the more of them you have, the more valuable you become to the marketplace, to your organization, to your family, to your community, to yourself. Now, most people develop skills reactively. They learn something when their job requires it. They take a course when their employer pays for it. They pick up a new ability when they have absolutely no other choice. And that is the minimum. That is doing just enough to keep the position you already have. But the person who develops skills proactively, the person who learns what tomorrow demands before tomorrow arrives, that person is always ahead. That person is always ready. That person never has to scramble when the world shifts because they already anticipated the shift and prepared for it months or years in advance. Think about what skills you need, not just the skills your current role requires. Think about the skills the next level requires. Think about the skills the level after that requires. Because here is how most people approach their career. They get promoted and then they start learning what the new role demands. But that is backwards. That is reactive. The person who advances consistently, the person who rises in a way that seems almost effortless to outside observers, is the person who was already practicing the skills of the next level before they were ever invited into it. They were already reading the books the leaders in that position read. They were already thinking about the problems that position is responsible for solving. They were already developing the judgment, the communication, the perspective, the discipline that the elevated role requires. So when the opportunity came, they did not need to catch up. They were already there. And let us talk about judgment for a moment, because this is one of the most underrated qualities in human development. Judgment, the ability to assess a situation accurately, weigh the relevant factors intelligently, and make a decision that serves the long-term interest rather than just the immediate preference. Most people have poor judgment, not because they are unintelligent, but because they have not worked on it. Judgment is not something you are born with in full. Judgment is something you cultivate through reading, through reflection, through seeking counsel from people wiser than yourself, through honest evaluation of your own past decisions. Where did you go right? Where did you go wrong? And why? The leader who has poor judgment makes costly decisions. And when you make costly decisions in a position of authority, people lose trust in you. And once you lose trust, the position becomes a burden rather than a platform. This is why so many people who reach elevated positions quickly lose them, not because they lacked ambition, but because they lacked the judgment to sustain what their ambition had earned them. And judgment is a product of the person, not the position. You must develop it before you arrive, not after. Now let me speak to you about character, because without character, everything else you build is sitting on a foundation of sand. You can have tremendous skill, you can have fierce ambition, you can have remarkable intelligence, but if your character is compromised, eventually everything collapses. Not maybe, eventually. Because character is not just about being honest in the big moments. Character is about who you are in all the small moments when nobody is watching. Character is what you do when the shortcut is available and choosing it would not cost you anything immediately. Character is how you treat the person who cannot do anything for you. Character is whether you keep your word when keeping it is inconvenient. Character is the accumulation of thousands of tiny daily choices, and those choices, compounded over time, build the most important asset or the most dangerous liability a person can carry. I have watched people destroy in a moment what took them a decade to build, simply because their character did not match their capability. They were enormously capable, but capability without character is like a powerful car with no steering wheel. All that power, all that speed, and absolutely no ability to direct it towards something worthy, and so the car crashes. And the tragedy is not just that the driver was hurt, the tragedy is that all that potential, all that capability, all that power, it never arrived at the destination it was built to reach. So work on your character. Deliberately, intentionally, not because someone is grading you, not because it looks good on a resume, but because character is the only foundation on which a life of lasting significance can be built. And you want to build something that lasts. You want to build something that remains after you are gone. You want your children and grandchildren to be able to say, that person lived with honor, that person kept their word, that person stood for something. And that kind of legacy is not attached to a title, it is attached to a person. Let me now talk to you about one of the greatest thieves of human potential, the thief of distraction. Because we live in an age that is absolutely saturated with distraction. More distraction than any generation in human history has ever had to navigate. And distraction is not neutral. Every hour you spend consuming entertainment that does not teach you anything is an hour you are not investing in the person you are trying to become. Now, I am not saying never rest. I am not saying never enjoy yourself. Rest is necessary. Enjoyment is part of a rich life. But there is a difference between intentional rest and mindless escape. And most people are not resting. They are escaping. They are escaping from the discomfort of growth by burying themselves in endless content that requires nothing from them and gives them nothing in return. The person who wants to work on themselves must make a serious accounting of their time, not an approximate accounting, a serious, honest, detailed accounting. Take a week and write down how you actually spend each hour, not how you intend to spend it, how you actually spend it. And at the end of that week, look at the total hours invested in growth and compare them to the total hours consumed by distraction. For most people, that comparison is deeply humbling. For most people, that exercise is the beginning of a real change, because once you see the truth clearly, it is very hard to continue pretending. Once you see how many hours were spent on things that did not move you forward, the question becomes unavoidable. What could you have become with those hours? What could you have built? What could you have learned? Who could you have served? Because here is the thing about time. It is the one resource that is completely irreplaceable. Money you can lose and earn again. Relationships you can damage and sometimes repair. Health you can neglect and sometimes restore. But time goes and it never comes back. Not a single second of it. And when a year passes without significant personal growth, that is not just a lost year. That is a year that you will never have the opportunity to reclaim. And if you lose 5 of those years, 10 of those years, 15 of those years, chasing entertainment instead of growth, what you have lost is not just time. You have lost the person you could have become in those years. You have lost the skills you could have developed, the wisdom you could have accumulated, the confidence you could have earned, the contribution you could have made, and no position, no title, no salary can compensate for the loss of what you could have been. Now let me address the question of mentorship and association, because this is one of the most powerful accelerators of personal development that exists, and most people dramatically underestimate it. Show me your 5 closest associations, and I will show you your future. Not approximately, accurately, because we become who we spend time with. Not instantly, but gradually, inevitably, and profoundly. The people around you shape your language, your thinking, your standards, your expectations, your beliefs about what is possible and what is not. And most people, if they examine their 5 closest associations honestly, will find that those associations are pulling them toward mediocrity rather than toward excellence. Now, I am not telling you to abandon your friends. I am not telling you to become arrogant or cold or superior. What I am saying is that you must be deliberate about creating additional associations with people who are further along the journey than you are. People who challenge your thinking. People who hold themselves to a higher standard. People who are building something meaningful. Because when you sit in the company of such people, something happens to you. Your appetite changes. Your sense of what is normal changes. Your tolerance for laziness, including your own, diminishes. And your vision of what you are capable of expands. Find those people. Pursue those relationships. Be willing to be the least accomplished person in the room sometimes, because that is when you grow the fastest. I remember when I first met Earl Schaff, the man who changed my life. I was 25 years old, broke, discouraged, and full of excuses. And this man sat down with me and did something nobody had ever done before. He took me seriously. He treated me not as what I was, but as what I could become. He challenged me not with criticism, but with questions. He asked me, "What have you read this year?" I did not have a good answer. He asked me, "What is your plan?" I did not have a real one. He asked me, "What are you doing to improve your value to the marketplace?" I was embarrassed by my answer, but instead of walking away, he said, "Let me show you something different. Let me show you a way of thinking about your life that could change everything." And it did, not because he gave me a position, not because he handed me an opportunity on a silver platter, but because he helped me see that I was the project, I was the work, I was the investment that needed to be made. And once I understood that, everything changed. That is the insight I want to leave deep inside of you today. You are the project. Not your career, not your company, not your industry, you. The person reading these words right now. You are the raw material from which your entire future will be constructed. And the question is whether you will take that raw material seriously, whether you will refine it, whether you will invest in it consistently and patiently and courageously over time. Because the marketplace rewards value. It does not reward good intentions. It does not reward effort for its own sake. It rewards genuine, developed, demonstrated value. And you create that value by working on yourself. Now let me talk about the relationship between discipline and freedom, because this is one that most people misunderstand. Most people think of discipline as the enemy of freedom. They think discipline means restriction, limitation, sacrifice. And it does require sacrifice in the short term. I will not pretend otherwise. Discipline requires you to choose the long-term gain over the short-term comfort. Discipline requires you to sit down and study when you would rather relax. Discipline requires you to keep your commitments when breaking them would be easier. In the short term, discipline feels like a cage, but here is what discipline actually produces over time. Freedom. Real, earned, lasting freedom. The freedom that comes from having skills nobody can take from you. The freedom that comes from having options because your value is high. The freedom that comes from being able to look yourself in the mirror without flinching. The person who has no discipline has no real freedom. They are a slave to their impulses, a slave to their moods, a slave to whatever circumstance arrives because they have no internal resources to draw upon. They are at the mercy of the economy, the mercy of their employer, the mercy of their relationships, because they have built nothing inside themselves that can sustain them when the external conditions become unfavorable. But the person who has cultivated discipline, who has built real skills, real knowledge, real character, that person carries their security inside them, and no external force can easily strip it away. I want to talk about the power of philosophy now, because your philosophy, the fundamental ideas through which you interpret the world, is the root from which everything else grows. Your philosophy produces your attitudes. Your attitudes produce your actions. Your actions produce your results. Your results, compounded over years, produce your life. So if your life is not what you want it to be, do not start with your results and work backwards. Start with your philosophy. That is the root. That is where the change must begin. And most people never examine their philosophy. They inherited it by accident from their parents, their neighborhood, their culture, their early experiences. They never sat down and said, let me evaluate these beliefs carefully. Are they accurate? Are they empowering? Are they leading me toward the life I want to build? Are they worthy of the person I intend to become? One of the most dangerous philosophies a person can carry is the philosophy of entitlement. The belief that the world owes you something because of who you are, where you came from, how hard your life has been, or how long you have been waiting. The world does not operate on the principle of owing. The world operates on the principle of value. What have you become? What can you contribute? What problems can you solve? What excellence can you bring? Entitlement is perhaps the single most effective destroyer of human potential ever conceived, because it directs your attention outward toward what you have not been given instead of inward toward what you have not yet developed. Replace the philosophy of entitlement with the philosophy of responsibility. Total, absolute, unwavering personal responsibility. Responsibility for your education, responsibility for your skills, responsibility for your habits, responsibility for your associations, responsibility for your results. Not blame when things go wrong. Responsibility, because when you take responsibility, you take power. When you say the situation is my responsibility, you also say, I have the power to change it. But when you say the situation is someone else's fault, you also say, I am powerless to change it. And powerless people do not advance. Powerless people wait for external conditions to improve before they begin living fully. And those conditions rarely improve on their own, which means powerless people spend their lives waiting. Now let me address ambition directly, because ambition without development is dangerous. Ambition is the fuel. Development is the vehicle. And you would not put high-octane fuel into a vehicle that has not been properly maintained and expect a smooth, safe journey. The vehicle must be worthy of the fuel. And that means working on the vehicle constantly, seriously, deliberately, maintaining it, upgrading it, improving its capacity. Because as your ambition grows, and it should grow, the demands on your character and your capability grow right alongside it. The bigger the vision, the bigger the person it requires to sustain it. I have seen many ambitious people crash their lives because they acquired resources, influence, or authority before they had developed the wisdom to steward those things responsibly. They wanted the big outcome before they had done the internal work. And when the big outcome arrived, instead of a platform to contribute from, it became a weight too heavy for their character to carry. The answer is not to diminish your ambition. The answer is to intensify your development. Match your growth to your vision. Make yourself worthy of the life you are reaching for, and then reach for it with everything you have. Let me speak now about failure, because if you are genuinely committed to working on yourself, you will fail regularly, and your relationship with failure will determine more about your ultimate outcome than almost any other single factor. Most people treat failure as a verdict. They fail at something and they conclude either that they personally are a failure or that the endeavor is hopeless. And both of those conclusions are wrong. Failure is not a verdict. Failure is information. Failure is the teacher you hired by attempting something difficult. Failure is the data point that tells you what needs to be adjusted, improved, rethought, rebuilt. The person who works on themselves treats failure as curriculum. They extract the lesson, apply the adjustment, and continue forward. The person who treats failure as a verdict stops, and stopping is the only true failure. Thomas Edison was not discouraged by thousands of attempts that did not produce a working light bulb because he understood something profound. Each attempt that did not work was teaching him something essential about what would work. He was not failing. He was learning. He was narrowing the field. He was becoming more capable with each attempt. And eventually, that accumulation of learning produced the result the world remembers. Most people are not willing to be that patient with their own development. Most people want to try once, twice, 3 times, and if the result does not arrive quickly, they declare the effort futile and move on to something easier. But the things worth building are never easy. They never were and they never will be. And the person who commits to working on themselves through failure, through setback, through disappointment, through delay, that person eventually produces results that look miraculous to those who only saw the outcome and not the journey. Let me now speak about service, because I believe that the highest expression of personal development is the capacity to serve others generously and effectively. All the skills you develop, all the knowledge you accumulate, all the character you build, these things only reach their full potential when they are deployed in the service of something beyond yourself, your family, your organization, your community, your field, the generation coming after you. Service is not weakness. Service is the ultimate application of strength. It takes a developed person to serve effectively. It takes patience, wisdom, skill, empathy, discipline, and generosity. And those are all things you build through working on yourself. The person who rises to an elevated position for the purpose of serving is a fundamentally different being from the person who rises for the purpose of being served. One of them builds something lasting. The other eventually hollows out everything around them. One of them leaves behind a legacy that continues to benefit people long after they are gone. The other leaves behind a crater. And the difference between those two outcomes is not intelligence and not opportunity. It is character. It is the quality of the person who occupied the position. Think about the leaders who have genuinely changed your life for the better. The teacher who believed in you when you did not believe in yourself. The manager who saw potential in you that nobody else had noticed. The mentor who gave you time and attention when they had no obligation to do so. What made them extraordinary was not their title. It was who they were as people. It was the generosity of their spirit, the sharpness of their insight, the steadiness of their presence. And those qualities are not granted by a position. They are developed by a person who has invested years, decades, in becoming someone worthy of the trust and influence that leadership requires. That is the life worth building. Not the biggest title, not the corner office, not the impressive resume filled with positions you collected but were never fully ready for. The life worth building is the one where every role you occupy, you bring more than the role requires. Where you exceed the expectations of your position not because you are performing for an audience, but because your standards for yourself are higher than any external requirement ever placed upon you. Where people around you are made better by your presence, more capable by your example, more inspired by your consistency. And here is what I want you to understand about that kind of life. It is available to you right now, not after you get the promotion, not after the circumstances improve, not after someone finally recognizes your potential. Right now, in whatever position you currently occupy, in whatever circumstance you are currently navigating, you can begin building the person. You can open the book tonight. You can write in the journal tomorrow morning. You can seek out the mentor this week. You can identify the skill that the next level requires and begin developing it today. You can examine your philosophy right now in this moment and ask yourself honestly whether the ideas you are carrying are serving you or limiting you. The path does not begin when the conditions are perfect. The conditions will never be perfect. The path begins when you decide decide that the person you are currently is not the final answer. When you decide that there is more inside you than what you have expressed so far. When you decide that you are willing to do the daily, unglamorous, often invisible work of becoming, and once you make that decision and act on it consistently, not occasionally, consistently, your life begins to reorganize around the quality of person you are becoming. The opportunities begin to find you. The right doors begin to open, not by magic, by mathematics. Because when you increase your value, the marketplace begins to respond to that increased value. When you deepen your skills, organizations begin to notice and require those skills. When you strengthen your character, people begin to trust you with greater responsibilities. When you expand your philosophy, you begin to see solutions that were always present but invisible to a smaller mind. Everything begins to compound. All the reading, all the discipline, all the reflection, all the development, it compounds. Just like money compounds in an account when you leave it alone and add to it consistently. Your personal development compounds into a life that, looked at from the outside, seems exceptional. But from the inside, it is simply the natural result of the daily investments you have been making for years. Now let me say something about patience, because everything I've described requires it. The world wants to give you a shortcut. The world is filled with people selling shortcuts. Buy this course and transform in 30 days. Follow this system and achieve success in 90 days. Use this strategy and skip the hard work entirely. And those promises are almost always fraudulent, because growth is a biological process. You cannot rush the growth of a tree by pulling on its branches. You cannot accelerate the development of a person by giving them responsibilities they have not yet grown the capacity to carry. Real growth takes time. It takes seasons. It takes the patience to plant, to water, to tend, and then to wait. And most people are not willing to wait. They want the harvest in the spring before the crop has had time to grow. But here's the thing about waiting with purpose. It is not passive. Waiting with purpose means that every day you are doing the work that will eventually produce the result you are waiting for. You are not sitting by the window watching for something to arrive. You are in the garden, working, reading, learning, practicing, reflecting, adjusting. And when the season for harvest finally comes, you will not have to wait long because the work will have already been done. I have lived long enough now to look back over decades and see the pattern clearly. The people who were in a hurry at the beginning, who wanted the outcome before the development was complete, they are largely gone from positions of influence. They flared and faded. But the people who were committed to the process, who were patient with their own growth while being fierce in their daily effort, those people are still building, still rising, still contributing, still becoming. Because there is no ceiling on personal development. There is no point at which you have learned everything, become everything, developed everything worth developing. The journey of becoming a better person is a lifetime project, and the most extraordinary people I have ever known are the ones who embrace that fully, who were genuinely excited by the prospect of how much more there was to learn and become and contribute. Let me bring all of this together now, because I want you to leave here today with something concrete. Something you can act on, not tomorrow, not next week, today. Your life is not determined by your position. Your life is determined by the person you are becoming daily. And every single day is an investment or a withdrawal from the account of your own potential. Every day you choose to read, to reflect, to practice discipline, to seek wisdom, to strengthen your character. That is a deposit. And those deposits compound. Every day you choose distraction over development, entertainment over education, comfort over growth. That is a withdrawal. And those withdrawals also compound in the other direction. The compound effect of daily deposits into your personal development account is a life that exceeds everything you could have predicted. The compound effect of daily withdrawals is a life that falls short of everything you know you were capable of. And the extraordinary thing is that you get to choose every single day. Not once, not at some pivotal crossroads, every day, in 1,000 small choices. What you read, what you listen to, who you spend time with, how you respond to difficulty, whether you keep your word when it is inconvenient, whether you choose growth when comfort is available. So the question is not whether you deserve a better position. The question is whether you are building a better person. Because the position will follow the person. It always does. It has always done so throughout all of human history. The person who consistently becomes more valuable, more capable, more trustworthy, more knowledgeable, more disciplined, that person is irresistible to the world. The world pulls them upward. Opportunities seek them. Others want to partner with them, learn from them, be led by them, not because they campaigned for a title, but because they built something inside themselves that the world genuinely needs. That is who you can be. That is who you are in the process of becoming, if you choose it with sincerity and act on it with consistency. Start with the person. Work on the person. Invest in the person. Elevate the person. And everything else, every position, every opportunity, every achievement worth celebrating will follow in due course. Not on your exact timeline, but inevitably, irresistibly. As surely as the harvest follows the planting, as surely as the sunrise follows the night, you are the most important project of your life. Treat yourself that way, begin today, and do not stop, ever. Now let me go even deeper with you because I want to make sure you leave here today with a thorough understanding of what this commitment actually looks like when lived out across a lifetime. Because the broad strokes are easy to agree with. Of course I should work on myself, of course I should read more, of course I should develop my skills. Everybody nods at those ideas, but nodding at an idea and actually constructing your life around it are two profoundly different things. And I want to close the gap between the nod and the action. Let us begin with the idea of a daily practice. Because personal development is not an event. It is not a conference you attend once a year. It is not a workshop you sign up for when you feel behind. It is a daily practice, a daily ritual, a set of choices you make before the world gets loud and starts pulling at your attention in 100 different directions. The morning matters more than most people realize. What you do in the first hour of your day sets the tone, the intention, and the trajectory for everything that follows. And most people spend their first hour in a state of reactive consumption, checking what the world has sent them overnight, absorbing the opinions and anxieties and demands of others before they have even had the opportunity to consult their own mind about what kind of day they intend to create. Protect your morning. This is not a luxury. This is a necessity. Give the first part of your day to the person you are becoming before you give it to the world. 30 minutes of reading, 15 minutes of reflection, 10 minutes of planning, whatever the structure, make it yours and honor it. Because the person who begins each day deliberately is compounding their development in a way that the reactive person is not. And after a year, after 5 years, after a decade of those protected mornings, the gap between those two people is not small, it is enormous. It is the difference between a life that was designed and a life that simply accumulated. And let me speak to you about reflection because this practice is severely underutilized by most people who are otherwise serious about their growth. Reading brings in new information, but reflection is the process by which that information becomes genuine understanding. Without reflection, reading is only data collection, and data without interpretation is useless. You have to sit with what you have read. You have to ask yourself, what does this mean for the way I am currently living? What does this principle reveal about a decision I made recently that I should revisit? What does this idea challenge me to change about my behavior or my thinking? Reflection is the laboratory where the raw material of information is converted into the refined product of wisdom. The journal is one of the most powerful tools for reflection that has ever existed. Not because it is sophisticated, but because the act of writing forces a kind of clarity that thinking alone rarely produces. When you write down what you are grateful for, you shift your focus toward abundance. When you write down what you want to accomplish, it crystallizes from a vague wish into something that begins to feel real and achievable. When you write down the lessons from your mistakes and failures, you honor those experiences by extracting their value rather than simply suffering through them and moving on. Write every day, even a paragraph, even a few sentences, but write, because the person who writes consistently is in an ongoing, honest dialogue with themselves that produces remarkable clarity over time. Now, I want to address the question of goals, because goals are the bridge between the present person and the future person, between who you are today and who you intend to become. But most people misunderstand goals. They think goals are about what they want to have, the car, the house, the income, the status, and those things can certainly be goals. But the deeper and more powerful purpose of goals is to clarify who you intend to become. Because when you set a goal that genuinely stretches you, it reveals the gap between who you currently are and who you need to become to accomplish that goal. And that gap is your curriculum. That gap is the specific work that needs to be done on the person. Suppose your goal is to lead an organization of 500 people. That is a significant undertaking. The question is not just how do I get that position? The question is who do I need to become to lead that many people effectively? What communication skills do I need? What depth of understanding of human psychology? What capacity to make difficult decisions under pressure? What level of integrity to maintain the trust of that many individuals over time? What clarity of vision to keep 500 people moving in a coherent direction? When you ask those questions honestly, they generate a specific development agenda, and now you are not working toward a position, you are working on a person. The person who, when they arrive at that position, will actually be capable of doing justice to it. Let me speak now about the concept of standards, because your standards are perhaps the most accurate predictor of your eventual outcomes. Not your goals, not your intentions, your standards, because you always perform in alignment with your standards, not your goals. You can set a goal to be healthy and still have a standard that permits you to skip exercise for a week without feeling genuine discomfort. You can set a goal to become an expert in your field and still have a standard that allows you to go days without studying. The goal is what you say you want. The standard is what you actually demand of yourself daily. And it is the standard that drives behavior. It is the standard that produces the reality you inhabit. So raise your standards, not just your goals. Raise the minimum acceptable level of performance that you hold yourself to each day. Raise the minimum acceptable quality of your thinking. Raise the minimum acceptable depth of your relationships. Raise the minimum acceptable rigor of your self-discipline. Because when your standards rise, your daily actions rise to meet them. And when your daily actions rise, your results rise. And when your results rise consistently over a long period, you discover that you have become someone you once would have been in awe of. Not because you got lucky, but because you demanded excellence of yourself in 100 small ways, every single day, for years. There is something I want to say now about the courage required to work on yourself, because I do not want to leave the impression that this is a comfortable or easy path. It is not. Personal development requires courage of a very specific kind, the courage to be honest with yourself, the courage to look at your own weaknesses and name them without flinching, the courage to acknowledge that you have been wrong about something important, the courage to change a belief you have held for years when the evidence suggests it is not serving you, the courage to admit that your current results are the accurate reflection of your current level of development, not the result of bad luck or unfair treatment. That particular honesty is rare. Most people would rather assign blame than take responsibility. Most people would rather believe that external forces are determining their outcomes than sit with the uncomfortable truth that they are largely the author of their own situation. And I understand that impulse. It is far more comfortable to be a victim of circumstance than to be the architect of your own results. Because when you are a victim, you are relieved of the burden of change. You get to stay exactly as you are and simply wait for the world to become more fair. But when you are the architect, you accept both the enormous burden and the extraordinary freedom of recognizing that you can change your outcomes by changing yourself. Choose the architect. Always choose the architect, because the victim, no matter how understandable their position, is powerless. And powerless people cannot build anything of lasting worth. They cannot change their families. They cannot transform their organizations. They cannot contribute meaningfully to their communities. But the architect, even an architect working with imperfect materials and difficult conditions, builds. They always build. And what they build over time becomes extraordinary. Now let me speak to you about generosity in the context of personal development, because I believe that as you grow, your growing creates an obligation to give back, to teach what you have learned, to encourage those who are at the beginning of the journey you have already traveled some distance on, to invest your time and attention in someone who needs what you have accumulated, because here is one of the great paradoxes of human development. The more you give away of what you have learned, the more it solidifies inside you. Teaching accelerates learning. Mentoring deepens mastery. When you take what you have studied and put it into language that helps someone else understand and apply it, something remarkable happens in you. The concept moves from intellectual knowledge to lived conviction. It becomes real in a new way. It becomes part of your identity rather than part of your information. So as you develop, as you grow, as you accumulate wisdom and skill and perspective, give it away generously. Not because it diminishes you to share it, exactly the opposite. Share it because the sharing of genuine wisdom between human beings is one of the most profound forms of connection that exists. It is how knowledge survives across generations. It is how the insights of one era are carried forward to serve the challenges of the next. And in the act of giving, you reinforce in yourself the very qualities that make you worth giving from. Think about what the world looks like when filled with people who are genuinely working on themselves. People who are reading, learning, reflecting, practicing discipline, building character, developing skills, serving others with the capability they have cultivated. Communities built by such people are extraordinary places. Organizations led by such people consistently excel. Families shaped by such people produce the next generation of builders and contributors. The ripple effect of one person's committed self-development extends far beyond anything that person can measure or even comprehend. Your growth is never just yours. It belongs to everyone you influence, everyone who works with you, everyone who is led by you, everyone who is raised by you, everyone who learns from you. Your development is a gift to your world even when the world has not yet asked for it. And that is perhaps the deepest reason to work on yourself. Not because success is personally satisfying, though it is. Not because achievement is rewarding, though it is. But because the world genuinely needs you to be your best. The world needs the specific contribution that only the fully developed version of you can make. And if you settle for an underdeveloped version of yourself, the world does not receive what it needed from you. The people who depended on your leadership do not receive the quality of guidance that only the refined you could provide. The problems that your particular combination of skills, character, and perspective were uniquely equipped to solve remain unsolved. Your absence from your own potential is not just a personal loss. It is a loss to everyone whose life you are meant to enrich. I want you to feel the weight of that, not as guilt, as inspiration, as the kind of purposeful urgency that does not lead to anxiety but to action. The kind that makes you want to pick up the book tonight, the kind that makes you want to have the honest conversation with yourself tomorrow morning. The kind that makes you look at your current habits and current associations and current daily choices and say, I owe the world more than this. I am capable of more than this. And I am going to begin delivering that more right now by working on the only thing within my direct control, the person looking back at me in the mirror. That person is worth the investment. That person is capable of extraordinary things. That person, developed fully, can change the lives of dozens, hundreds, perhaps thousands of others. That person can build organizations that endure. That person can leave a legacy that outlasts their time on earth. But none of that happens by accident. None of it happens by waiting for a better position to arrive. All of it happens through the deliberate, disciplined, daily, decade-long commitment to becoming. Work on the person, not the position. Work on the person. That is the answer. That has always been the answer. And every great achievement in your life, in your career, in your family, in your community, every single one of them will be the direct result of the person you had the courage and the commitment to become. Now go to work, not on your circumstances, on yourself, and do not stop. Let me now take you further down the road of this subject because there are dimensions of personal growth that rarely get discussed. Dimensions that are quieter, less dramatic, less exciting to talk about, but absolutely essential to genuine and lasting development. One of those dimensions is the cultivation of inner stillness, the capacity to be quiet with yourself, the capacity to sit with your own thoughts without immediately reaching for a device or a distraction. Because in that stillness, in those moments when the noise of the world falls away and you are simply present with your own mind, that is where the deepest work gets done. Most people are afraid of silence, not consciously, but their behavior reveals it. Every quiet moment must be immediately filled with sound. Every spare second must be occupied with input. And what they are really running from is the voice inside them that asks the uncomfortable questions. The voice that says, is this truly the life you intended to build? Is the direction you are moving actually taking you toward the person you want to become? Are the choices you are making today consistent with the values you claim to hold? Those questions are inconvenient. They demand answers, and answers demand change. So people fill the silence and avoid the questions, and the years slip by without the honest accounting that would have redirected their lives towards something far more aligned with their deepest potential. Cultivate silence. Create space for it in your days, not just the silence of an empty room, but the silence of a mind that has been given permission to simply observe rather than constantly react. Meditate, pray, take walks without listening to anything. Sit with a journal and let your thoughts settle onto the page without judgment or editing. Let the deeper layers of your mind surface. Let the truths you have been avoiding get their moment of acknowledgement. Because suppressed truths do not disappear, they accumulate and they leak out sideways into your behavior, your relationships, your decisions. Better to face them in the stillness than to discover them in a crisis. The examined life is the one worth celebrating, not the life that was busy every single second, not the life that accumulated the most noise, the life that was examined honestly, adjusted courageously, and lived in genuine alignment with what the person inside most deeply valued. That is the good life. That is the rich life in the truest sense of the word, and it requires the discipline of stillness, as surely as it requires the discipline of learning and the discipline of consistent effort. Now, I want to talk to you about the long game because everything I am describing is a long game. And the culture we inhabit is not interested in the long game. The culture is obsessed with speed, rapid transformation, overnight success, instant results. And this obsession is poisonous to genuine development because genuine development does not have a shortcut. It has a process, and the process must be honored. You cannot skip steps in the development of a person any more than you can skip grades in the development of a tree. The roots must go deep before the branches can grow high, and deep roots take time. They require seasons. They require the patient, invisible work that happens underground where no one can see it and no one will praise you for it. This is the work that separates those who simply want to appear successful from those who are committed to genuinely becoming excellent. The work nobody sees, the reading at midnight when the house is quiet, the practice session nobody asked you to do, the honest self-assessment on a Sunday evening when you could be resting, the preparation for a conversation that has not yet happened, the development of a skill that you may not need for another 2 years, that invisible investment, that quiet, consistent, unsexy daily labor on the person, is the foundational activity of a genuinely extraordinary life. And here is the reward that makes all of it worthwhile. There comes a day, and for the person who has been genuinely working on themselves, this day always arrives, when you look at your life and recognize, perhaps for the first time clearly, that you have become someone you once aspired to be. Not someone perfect, not someone finished,